Tell you one thing I'm excited about, another year of caffeinated beverages. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are too. It is December 26th as I record this, so I don't know when I'm going to publish it. It could be right before New Year's, it could be right after. So if it's before New Year's, what are you guys doing for New Year's? I want to know. Please let me know. If it's after New Year's, Happy New Year! Are you all as excited as I am to see what 2024 holds for us? And what did you guys do on New Year's Eve? Are you guys partiers or are you play board games at home with yummy beverage type folks like I am? I don't remember the last time I went out for New Year's Eve. I was probably in my 20s. I'm not even sure. But I don't like to be anywhere but home on New Year's Eve. I like to play board games or do jigsaw puzzles or watch movies, just anything that I can do in the comfort of my own home, in my jammies, with a yummy beverage, with someone I love, specifically my husband. That's just the way it's been for me for years, and I am perfectly happy with that. Even when I was younger and going out for New Year's Eve, it was always overrated. It never ended up being what you expect it to be. And fortunately, I learned that lesson early on. But speaking of new things, what I'm going to talk to you about today in this video are new releases. Now, specifically, I started a series way back in November of 2022 of videos that I put out every month of new releases that I'm excited about. And each month I would talk about books anywhere from about 5 books. Sometimes I got out of hand. I think there was one month where I did 8 or 9, but average about 6 or 7 new releases that I'm specifically excited about and that I share with you guys. And I wanted to take a look back to see how many of those books I read and were they worthy of being excited about. How many of those books, if I didn't read them, do I still want to read and I'm still excited about, and how many just aren't going to make the cut for 2024. So since there are so many books to talk about, I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So I'm only going to talk about the new releases that I was excited about for the first half of the year. And since I started the series in November, I'm going to include November and December, and then I'm only going to go as far as May. And then sometime mid-2024, I'll do the other half of the year. So I'm going to start with the books that I was excited to be released in November of 2022. I believe there were 6 books on the list. And I actually did read one of those books. And that was None of This Would Have Happened If Prince Were Still Alive by Carolyn Prusa. Now, to be fair, I ended up reading this one sooner than I normally would have because my boss at work read it and absolutely loved it. And on top of that, being new to Savannah, the book takes place in Savannah and there's tons of references, and she knew that I would have fun, so she absolutely recommended it. And so I read it and I did have fun with it, and I'm glad I read it. And I would still recommend it to all of you. So let's talk about the other 5 books. There was one nonfiction book that we were all excited about, and it's kind of sad to talk about it now. And that is Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. As we all know, Matthew Perry passed away in 2023, and it really hit a lot of people hard. Now, will I still read this book? And I think that's going to be a big maybe. After his death, there was so much about his life that came out that I read about, and I almost feel like it would just make me too sad to read it, because a lot of people who did read it told me they were so surprised by his death because it felt like in reading his book that he had finally reached a place where he was going to be okay. And so I just feel like it would be too sad to read it. So it's highly unlikely that I will read this book now. The next is The Last Party by Claire Mackintosh. I love Claire Mackintosh. I've read a couple of her other books and I really enjoy it. And this is another mystery thriller, and this is definitely going to stay on my TBR. Next was Secluded Cabin Sleep 6 by Lisa Unger. This one's a tough one because I like Lisa Unger. I've read a couple of her other books. I've enjoyed her, but a lot of people didn't like this book, and it's got a fairly low rating on Goodreads. So I will keep this on my TBR, but it is unlikely that I will read it anytime soon, and it's quite possibly it will be culled from my TBR in the future. Next was The Personal Assistant by Kimberly Bell. This is another mystery thriller. It is not very highly rated on Goodreads, and on top of that, I really haven't heard anybody talk about this book. So because it's a mystery thriller, I think it's going to stay on my TBR, but like Secluded Cabin, I think it's not going to be one that will be read soon, and it might possibly be removed from my TBR sometime in the future. And finally, for November, we have The Wilder Women by Ruth Emmy Lang. This is one that is kind of an offshoot from my normal reads, which I usually include one or two of those for new releases that I'm excited about each month. And this one has an element of fantasy and magical realism. Magical realism I usually have a good time with, but fantasy I don't have a good time with. And based on that alone, I would probably say, no, I'm going to take this off my TBR. But in rereading the synopsis, this is still one that intrigues me. It follows two sisters that have certain abilities as far as, I think, knowing other people's memories, and I think their mother is missing. And they use these abilities as together they go to try to find their mom. So we have the relationship between sisters and daughters and mothers, and a journey to try to find somebody who's missing. Just all of these components still intrigue me about this book. So this one's going to stay on my TBR. Will I read it soon? Who knows? So for November, not bad. I mean, I read one of the 6. Another one is coming off my TBR, and 2 I still really look forward to. Okay, moving on to December of 2022. There were another 6 books on this list, only one of which I read, but it was The Light Pirate by Lily Brooks Dalton, and I ended up loving it. In fact, it was one of my favorites of the year. So that one came through for me, yay. But let's talk about the other 5. First up is The Sunshine Girls by Molly Fader. Now to look at this cover, I would think, is this going to stay on my TBR? I don't know. However, it's very highly rated on Goodreads. We're dealing with historical fiction, and we're dealing with a relationship between friends. I haven't heard of anybody talking about this book, but with the things that I just mentioned, this is definitely going to stay on my TBR. I'm still intrigued by this one. Next up is A Dangerous Business by Jane Smiley. I was super excited about this one. Well, that kind of goes without saying. These are all books that I was super excited, but this one specifically, but things have changed. So I'm still somewhat intrigued by the synopsis. It takes place in the 1850s, so I'm not super excited about that, but it does have to do with a relationship between women. I do like historical fiction. There's a mystery element to this, and it's fairly short. It's only 224 pages, so it's one of those books where if I had some intrigue and it's short and I can get through it fast, but unfortunately, it's also very poorly rated on Goodreads. So it's gonna stay on my TBR, but it might be culled later. Next up is The Ingenue by Rachel Kapelke Dale. This is a mystery thriller. I reread the synopsis. I'm not as intrigued as I was before. It's not very well rated on Goodreads, and I've heard nobody talk about this book. This one's coming off my TBR. Next up is All the Dark Places by Terry Perlato. This is a mystery thriller, I believe a police procedural, which I enjoy. This is definitely better rated on Goodreads, and it's also the first in a series. So those always really appeal to me. I love finding a good new detective series. I don't need to be starting any new series right now, but it ticks a lot of boxes. We have mystery thriller. We have a strong female as the series main character, and lots of people seem to like it. So this one's staying put. Finally, we have The Last Invitation by Darby Kane. This is another mystery thriller. Darby Kane is a well-known mystery thriller author. The synopsis still sounds intriguing to me. Unfortunately, it's very poorly rated on Goodreads. I think what I'm going to do with this one, I have Pretty Little Wife on my shelf, and as it stands right now, I have it set up on my TBR for January. And if I like this one, then I will put The Last Invitation back on my TBR. But as it stands right now, based on the Goodreads rating and the fact that I don't have a working knowledge of if I like Darby Kane's writing style, I'm just going to take it off my TBR now and maybe re-add it after I read Pretty Little Wife. All right, let's get to January 2023. I talked about 8 books, but I think the first 3 I just mentioned really quickly at the beginning as books that everybody on Booktube was going to be talking about. So I just threw them out there. They weren't specific books that I was incredibly excited about. However, of those three, I read two of them and I really enjoyed them both. One was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. That ended up being one of my favorites of the year. I absolutely loved that book. Scared the crap out of me. So yay, of course everybody was excited about that one and I ended up loving it. Another one was Exiles by Jane Harper, which was the third in the Aaron Fox series. I did read it. I did very much enjoy it. I loved that whole series and highly recommend it. And the third was Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica. And like I said, these were books that I just mentioned because everybody was going to be talking about these books, so I didn't even add it to my TBR to begin with. Of the 5 books that I specifically talked about that I was excited about, I did read one of them and I did love it, and it ended up being one of my favorites of the year, and that is Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. This one was a fun one for me because not only did I discover it sometime in December and ended up becoming really excited about it coming out in January, but it ended up being longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And of course, that means so many more people discovered it. And I think it was a lot of people's favorite of 2023, myself included. I absolutely loved it. I hope a lot of you ended up reading it. Another book that I talked about for January was What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. I'm still very interested in reading this book. She has another one coming out in January of 2024 that I'm excited about, and this one still appeals to me. It will definitely stay on my TBR. It's got a decent rating on Goodreads, so yeah, this one's staying put. Next is Small World by Laura Zigman. This is literary fiction. I'm still intrigued by the synopsis. It follows a relationship between two sisters. It sadly has a fairly low rating on Goodreads. I haven't really heard a whole lot of people talking about it, but I'm still interested in it. And so it is staying on my TBR. Next was Age of Vice by Deepti Kapoor. I still have my ARC that I got my hands on. And so that reason alone, it'll probably stay on my TBR because I am less likely to remove something from my TBR if I have the physical copy of it. This is a chunker, so that's going to add to the reasons that I don't pick it up right away. It's got a fairly average rating on Goodreads, but I'm still really intrigued by this story. It's a mystery thriller that takes place in India, and the fact that the synopsis still intrigues me and I have a physical copy, both those things keep it on my TBR. Next is Locust Lane by Stephen Amadon. This is a mystery thriller that takes place in the New England part of the United States. It's not really well rated on Goodreads, but I still am intrigued by the synopsis, and it says that for fans of Mystic River by Dennis Lehane, which I just read at the end of December and I loved. So this one is going to stay on my TBR. Every time I see it on the shelf at work, my eye is drawn to it and I know I still want to read it. So yeah, this one's not going anywhere. And I just realized there was a 6th book that I talked about in January, and the 6th book was Stranded by Sarah Daniels. Now, if I were to have recorded this video a week ago, I might have looked at this and maybe taken it off my TBR, but I think just yesterday I added it to my audiobook library, and I want to say by the time this video publishes, I might have already read it. Maybe I'll put a little notation down here to say whether I did or not. So for the purposes of this video, it's staying on my TBR. And the reason I might have taken it off is because it's young adult. However, it's got sci-fi and dystopia in it. So who knows whether I would have taken it off or not, but I might have already read it. So we'll see. Okay, getting into February, I believe there were 6 books I talked about. 7 books I talked about. I ended up not reading any of them, but I can tell by looking at this list, there are still some books that I'm pretty interested in. The first is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay. I think a lot of people read this book in 2023. A lot of people liked this book, and it's going to stay on my TBR. I'm still very interested in the story. It was a Goodreads choice nominee for mystery thriller. It doesn't have a super high rating, but this is one of those times where I'm interested anyway. To be fair, I'll probably read The Great Believer first, but I'm very interested in this author. I haven't read her yet, but yeah, this one's staying on my TBR. Next is On the Savage Side by Tiffany McDaniel. A lot of people read this one too. I'm super intrigued. I'm still intrigued by this one. So many people want me to read Betty by Tiffany Daniel, and I want to read it too. So who's to say which one I'll read first? but this one's staying on my TBR. It's very highly rated. It's got a very intriguing synopsis, I believe based on true events. It's a mystery thriller, but I think it's a little bit more literary than your average mystery thriller. So yeah, this one I'm still pretty excited about. Next one is The Angel Maker by Alex North. I would have to say this one's probably coming off my TBR. I read The Whisper Man. I thought it was okay, but I didn't love it as so many other people did. And The Angel Maker is poorly rated on Goodreads, and there isn't really anything that I'm overly excited about when I reread the synopsis. I think if I read another Alex North, I'm going to read The Shadows before anything else. And we'll see how that goes. And if that is an even better experience than The Whisper Man, maybe I'll add The Angel Maker back to my TBR. Next is Hungry Ghost by Kevin Jared Hossein. This is absolutely staying on my TBR. This is a combination historical fiction mystery with literary leanings. Not a whole lot of people have been talking about this book, and there aren't a whole lot of ratings on Goodreads, and it still maintains a relatively high rating. And this is just one of those ones that ticks enough boxes for me. It's going to stay on my TBR. Next is A Spell of Good Things by Ayobami Adebayo. This, of course, ended up being longlisted for the Booker Prize. I'm not a Booker Prize follower, but this is fairly highly rated on Goodreads. It's literary fiction that takes place in Nigeria, and it has a story that still intrigues me. This one's staying on my TBR. Next is The Porcelain Moon by Janie Chang. This is historical fiction. I believe it's around World War I. This ticks a lot of boxes for me as well, but my TBR is inundated with historical fiction around either World War I or II. I'm still really intrigued by the story. It's got a pretty good rating on Goodreads. I think it'll probably stay on my TBR, but it's one of those ones I'll probably reach for another one with a similar genre first. But yeah, it's gonna stay put. Finally, for February is The Friendship Breakup by Annie Catherine. This one appealed to me because I've had a friendship breakup before, and I think one of the reasons there was a friendship breakup in this story was one of the characters decided not to have children while the other woman decided to become a mom, and there was friction there, and I could totally relate to that. So while this isn't really highly rated on Goodreads, I think it's going to stay on my TBR just because it's so relatable to me. And it just might be one of those mood reads sometime in 2024. Moving on to March, I talked about another 6 books. I haven't read any of them yet. So February and March were total fails as far as reading books that I'm excited about. But this is going to be quick because I can look at this list right now and tell you that I absolutely am going to keep all 6 of these books on my TBR. The first one is Hang the Moon by Jeanette Walls. It's historical fiction. It's got coming of age elements to it. It was a Goodreads Choice nominee for Best Historical Fiction. So yeah, still going to read that one. I Will Find You by Harlan Coben. It's a mystery thriller. It's got a superb rating on Goodreads. I'm absolutely going to keep this on my TBR. 48 Clues into the Disappearance of My Sister by Joyce Carol Oates. I haven't had a good history with Joyce Carol Oates. This one's got a terrible rating on Goodreads, but I'm absolutely keeping it on my TBR because I'm very intrigued by the synopsis, and it's fairly short. The Last Beekeeper by Julie Carrick Dalton. It's got an excellent rating on Goodreads. I love the synopsis. It's sci-fi dystopian climate change fiction, so I'm totally on board for that. Yep, keeping it. Dust Child by Wen Fan K Mai. Fantastic rating, historical fiction, Vietnam War, sisters. Keeping it. And All That Is Mine I Carry With Me by William Landay. I've read this author before. I enjoyed him. It's got a decent Goodreads rating, and I'm still intrigued by the synopsis. Keeping it. All right, let's move on to April. So I talked about 9 books in April, but the first 3 were just quick mentions because everybody was going to be talking about these books. Happy Place by Emily Henry. Of course, I have a copy of that. I will probably read it. The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. I have on my TBR. A lot of people love that book. That's going to stay on my TBR. When I'll get to it, who knows? And In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune, which I don't even think I added to my TBR. I read The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I liked it. I didn't love it as much as everybody did. In the Lives of Puppets just doesn't intrigue me. But let's see, we have Homecoming by Kate Morton. It's very highly rated. It was a Goodreads Choice nominee for mystery thriller, and it's historical fiction that takes place in Australia. So this one's staying on my TBR. Before We Were Innocent by Ella Berman. This is a mystery thriller. It doesn't have really great ratings. Not a whole lot of people have talked about it, if any, I don't think. It ticks some boxes as far as a mystery thriller that surrounds a group of girlfriends, so we have relationships there. But for now, I think it's going to come off my TBR just because there's really nothing unique about the synopsis that's holding my interest. The House is on Fire by Rachel Beanland. This is staying on my TBR. It's still got a really good rating. It's historical fiction with a mystery element to it. So yeah, I'm still looking forward to this one. Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. Absolutely staying on my TBR. Like I said, I read my first Dennis Lehane in December. I read Mystic River, absolutely loved it. I love his writing, and I'm pretty sure I've recently added the audiobook into my audio library, so I'll be reading this one pretty soon, I believe. Oh, next was Sea Change, which I ended up reading in 2023. I didn't love it, but I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it. And finally, we have The Eden Test by Adam Sternberg. This one, unfortunately, is not very highly rated on Goodreads, but it's going to be one of those ones that I'm going to keep on my TBR anyways. It's a mystery thriller. It's got a unique story. Who knows when I'll get to it, but it's staying on my TBR for now. Finally, we're in May. We're in the home stretch. I talked about 7 books in May. I've only read one of them, but it was The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brammer. I ended up enjoying that very much. I still recommend it. There were also 2 that I have physical copies of, and that is No Two Persons by Erica Bauermeister. I'm still very much interested in this book, and of course I have a physical copy, so I will be getting to it hopefully sometime this year. And then I also have Quietly Hostile by Samantha Irby. I will definitely be reading this sooner rather than later. I think I started it at one point in 2023, and for no reason that I can think of, certainly not the fault of the book, I put it down and didn't continue on. But I read her other collection of essays, Wow, No Thank You. I listened to it and it was absolutely so much fun to listen to, hilarious, laugh out loud funny, and I have the same expectations for this book. So this one is definitely going to be read soon. Next is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. While I can tell you it's staying on my TBR for a number of reasons, I read Cutting for Stone by this author. I absolutely loved it, so I know I'm going to like this one as well. This is very highly rated on Goodreads. It was a Goodreads Choice nominee for Best Historical Fiction. I'm absolutely going to read this one, but unfortunately, it's also just over 700 pages. So when I'm going to read it, I don't know. You guys know how I feel about giant chunker books. I know I'm going to love it. It's just a matter of committing that time it's going to take to get through it. The next is The Making of Another Major Motion Picture Masterpiece by Tom Hanks. The fact that it's written by Tom Hanks intrigues me. It's got a very average rating on Goodreads. Not a whole lot of people have talked about it, but I'm still really intrigued by the synopsis. It's historical / literary fiction. There's too many things that intrigue me about this book. It is staying on my TBR. Next is Adrift by Lisa Brdeaux. Absolutely nobody is talking about this book. It's a mystery thriller, but it also has elements of sci-fi and climate change fiction, so it's staying on my TBR. I might live to regret it, but I am definitely going to get to that one sometime in 2024. Climate change is just too relevant to ignore. Oh, and I forgot, I did read this last one. I hate to end on a poor note, but the last one is Killing Me by Michelle Gagnon. I read this one and I was terribly disappointed in it. So for May of 2023, the new releases that I was excited about, I read 2 out of the 7. So that's not bad. But unfortunately, a book that I was excited about, Killing Me, what ended up being something that I was not excited about. So that was a letdown. How did we do? So again, I went back to November. We have about 43 books that I was specifically excited about, and I read 6 of them. That's not a whole lot, but 5 of those 6 books I absolutely loved, and it was worthy of my excitement. That's good, right? And only 1 of them failed me. And I feel pretty good about which books that I culled from all of these books that I was at one point excited about. we have to do that every once in a while. We really have to go back because things change. We change. Some of the things that excite us change. So I'm happy that I did this and went through and was reminded of the books that I'm still excited about and let go of the books that were not so much. So how about you guys? Have you read any of these books? Was it because you saw them here on this channel in my series of new releases that I'm excited about? I would love to know. I'd love to know if I steered you in the right direction or if I let you down a terrible path. Please let me know, or you could just say hi in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for sticking with me. I really appreciate you being here. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.